The purpose of this video is to give a brief overview of the OBS software, Open Broadcasting Software, which is freely available to download and use for either a Windows, Mac-based or Linux operating system. So if you search for OBS software in a browser, then you'll be greeted with this page, and you'll see at the top download options for different versions. So it's quite difficult within OBS software to demonstrate how to record something live. So what I'm going to do is to show you the features and how one sets up such scenes and sources that you would use during a recording. And then the second video has an example of a recording that's been made using this software. So the screen one is presented with when opening up OBS once downloaded, and on here I'm using a Mac purely because it enables me to use more inputs than I would using a Windows based machine. You'll find that occasionally the software will update, and having done that you might need to go back and change some of the scenes and sources that you've set up, but mostly it works seamlessly. So this would be the screen that you would see, although this is taking multiple images of the main screen, which is why you see many copies. So ordinarily you would see one of the scenes that are down here on the left, and so for example the whole webcam view, which I've previously set up, will give you this. I'll briefly show you some of the others, and then when I do the recording you'll be able to see what that looks like having made the video. So this is the whole webcam view as a scene. This is what I've called PDF notes on the screen. So this is viewing in a Adobe Reader window, in this case just a section of the notes. I'm also using an iPad, which if I just press the home button you'll see the relevant page that I'm going to be viewing is there. You'll also see there on the left hand corner at the bottom a webcam, which I've set up a separate one to use so that I can look at that when I'm doing anything on the side with the visualizer or the iPad. So there are two cameras attached to this. The visualizer, as you'll see, which I'll be using briefly to indicate that, again I've got a camera pointing in this direction so I can talk to the audience. The other pages are, well, there's the web page view, and I'll be viewing a different page shortly. And again for this I've got the front webcam view, again just parked in the corner. And the other ones that you see down here on the left are not used for any other purpose except in this case to do this particular recording. So the scenes that you will see when I've made the sample recording, the second video, will comprise either using the whole webcam view, the notes on the screen, the iPad view, the visualizer, or a web page view. I'll explain how the scenes are set up in a moment, but just let me take you over here onto the right hand side. You can see here there's a stop recording, so that's what would start off as a start recording, and then there is a button here to pause, so that if you want to momentarily pause the video to get some more equipment, say, then you can do that there. I've not used the virtual camera or studio mode. You can look at those if you wish. And streaming is quite useful if you want to do a live stream. Again, I've not used that. The software that we're using for our courses doesn't allow for that. But to do asynchronous recordings, we find this particular software brilliant. So the other settings that you'll see over here, so I'll just go into them. So the ones that I've utilized is output, which just tells you where the documents are to be stored once recorded. So the recording path, one can set up various audio settings. We've not done that. In the video settings, one can choose the various aspect ratios and also the resolution. As you'll see, these have been left at 30 frames per second and 1440 by 900 on this machine. One last thing on the output, you'll see that the recording format that's been used is MP4. You can choose other formats. I clearly can't show you how to change that because at the moment I'm using this piece of software to record this video. But MP4 seems to work pretty well at the resolution and frames per second that I've indicated. Finally, on these settings, one can set hotkeys. So these are shortcuts to be able to switch between the various scenes. So as I said, I'm going to be using various scenes for the sample video, and those can be set up typically. For example, if you want to say for start recording, you can use this and say call that S. We have used these at the beginning. However, having even set up hotkeys for say the lower row on the keyboard, if one uses any of those when typing in say in search engine, then it will affect the short key setting that has been stored. So in particular, if one's typing in something which has a P in it, then it will immediately pause the recording. So that wasn't overly helpful. So we're not actually now using those. But in other situations, if it's merely a matter of moving between scenes and not doing any typing, they can be quite useful to allow for seamless transitions. So on each of these scenes as shown, one has to set up a relevant source. So you decide in advance what kind of input and output you would want to show and call it something appropriate. So you can see here whole webcam view, notes and so on have been set up. But for each of those, one has to have appropriate input and output. So I'll show you under the recording button that we're actually in. And again, for example, if one wanted to set up a new scene, so one had a further input device, in this case, one would just merely add this here, and it will then ask you to call it something, and you have to use a name that you haven't previously used, and again, call it something which is easily remembered. Once one has stored a new scene, one has to then provide that with some sources, which I'll show you how you do that in a minute. But one can also reorder those here. So for example, if you use two very frequently, then it makes more sense for those to appear at the top of the list of scenes rather than having to scroll down and find the one you want much further down in the list. So again, we've set these up in an order where we might typically go from the top one to the next one. So in any one of these scenes, one has to set a source to see what it looks like. And so let me just show you within here, I've set up display capture, and that literally is just capturing this whole display, which allows me to make this recording. But if you want to add another source, so for example, if you want to set up a scene which is for the input device, iPad, side webcam, visualizer, browser window, or a PDF file in a Adobe Reader window, then one would have to add this in this source. So one adds those here, and depending on what one wishes to add, input capture, for example, which is audio, so we haven't used those. We have used either a browser window or a window capture. So a window capture one would use to add in either a Safari window or a other piece of software such as Adobe Reader. Video capture device that one would add would be the visualizer or any additional webcams or the iPad. Now, by using a Mac machine, it means that when one plugs the iPad in, it's automatically recognized. So you'll see when I do the dummy recording what it actually looks like. But the other sources one would typically need in a scene are as follows. I've used a background as a color source, and obviously I've added for those front webcam and side webcam views where I'm showing other things, those two inputs as a separate entity in the bottom left hand corner. So for example, if I wanted to add a window, one would click this, one would call it something. Let's just call it window test. It's not necessarily the best thing to use. One can also add, as you see, existing windows, and then that would show you a drop-down menu in which you would find what you wanted to add. So I could add this outline guidance notes document, which I've already uploaded. One can add this Safari window and so on. Now let's suppose I add this Safari window, then you'll see what happens. It appears in here, and one can then resize this. One can either resize it, one first like this, and so it fits neatly in the window that one is looking at. So let's make that a little smaller, move that up, say, and I won't completely adjust that because I want to delete it. But having sized it accordingly, you can trim it and you can stretch it. If you want to trim it, that's option. So if there's a part of the screen that you wouldn't want to have, for example here on a Mac, that's option, and then scroll along, remove that. One can also stretch. You can do that using Shift, although you wouldn't necessarily want to do too much of that. But it can be quite helpful to get the size just right with a little bit of stretching so it fills the screen. So we'll attempt to delete that, which to remove. Yes. But in addition to, in this case, adding in this recording window this display capture, which is what I needed for this, you can add other sources, and the other sources that I've used are, first of all, a video capture device, which again we can put test, but you'll see also ones that have already been added, which you can reuse. And let's discard those, and I can find either the, in this case, front webcam, side webcam, iPad, or the visualizer. And again, those will appear in the window, and you can resize and accordingly. But so I'll just delete that so you can see how you delete. So that's the thing I added. Well, I can delete that just by clicking minus, and I'm back to where I was. But what I've added, is you'll see when you view the video as a source, not only the main window, so a browser window or the iPad view, visualizer, and so on. I've added, as I've just indicated, a front or side webcam view, but one can then make that image as small as you like in the corner. In addition, because I don't necessarily want a black background if there's a part of the window that I'm viewing visible to stand out, so often a white background would be quite good for that. Well, again, one can add that here as a source, as a color source, and I could call that again test. And it'll give you again a window that one can resize and select the color of. So typically I've used white for those. So I'll cancel those, and I'll just delete that. So again, just here. Now, once one's set up one's sources, there's also an order to all of these. So in this recording one, clearly there's only one source, which is the display as captured. But I would put as a background, say, this white background to fill the space. And then I would put the window, main window that we're viewing, to fill the screen. And then the small webcam view I would want on top. Well, again, once one's in one of these sources, one can reorder them as indicated by these two buttons. The other two useful items on the sources window are to lock, which is quite useful if you have a habit of deleting things unintentionally, and also to hide them if you don't want them for a particular recording. So, having introduced all of those different aspects, what I'm now going to do is just a brief recording, and then having done that, I'll show you what that looks like in the second recording.